they found my views to be problematic. Because we're now entering into the realm of mainstream media.
It's this book you've been working on. Truly a life's work.
5 kind of main publishing houses. We want to go for the big ones,
Yeah.
right? My agent had reached out to me. They're all saying no, not interested. Yeah, we love the book, but you're like
The problem.
I mean, you got to think about the multinational corporations that own the media. And these are the same organizations that own the companies that I'm talking shit about a lot. I'm not out in the world to hurt anyone.
You're just questioning a lot of things.
I'm trying to help people.
What's maybe keeps you up at night sometimes when you think about the book?
That's easy. The chapter that I'm about to start that is around childhood trauma, core wound that really, truly has shaped my entire life. I feel like very equipped and emotionally stable enough to write about that experience. And it's like one of those ideas you almost wish you could put back in the box. Maybe I should try and track down this perpetrator and have a conversation with them, sever any karmic ties. That's terrifying. Not to say that this is going to be the path for everyone who's experienced something like that, but people might be able to find their own version of reconciliation. You know, when you've really looked at your suffering and you've been willing to face it squarely to try and move past it, for me, it gives me just a tremendous level of love for other people.
Well, Luke, I'd say welcome to the Great Unlearned, but we're co-releasing this. I will play the role of host. But you're going to release it on the Lifestylist podcast, your podcast. And we're here at the Fall Into Here Equinox Festival hosted by Jared and Valisa Picard and on the property of Eben and Kat. And so it's awesome to be here. We've had an amazing day so far. It's day 1. And
yeah, I mean, it's been so incredible. I don't know how either of us are going to really talk, but
dude, we just got through with Rowan's sound bath, breath work, guided, whatever, and I was like in the middle of that, like, oh fuck, how am I gonna pull this together?
Same.
But I feel way better than I did 30 minutes ago as far as being able to execute on the plan.
The second ice bath of the day tied it in for me.
Yeah, that really helped.
I was like, okay, I'm back.
And, you know, a few people were asking me kind of what we were going to talk about. And I had mentioned to you in passing, I said, hey, have you thought about, you know, maybe what would be interesting for you? And you're like, hey, I'm kind of up for anything. And I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about what you've been so engaged in lately, as that's obviously front of mind for you, but it's also, it's truly a life's work. And it's this book you've been working on. And I believe the title is A Horse Named Lonesome?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I had a horse named Lonesome.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Which has very little to do with the book, but it was just a cool title.
How did the horse get the name Lonesome?
Well, he was a black horse. I don't know what kind. My dad's the horse expert in the family. He had a bunch of horses before he eventually migrated or transitioned rather to all mules, because the shit he was doing in the Rocky Mountains was too arduous for horses. So he switched to mules, but he was a rodeo guy. And so he had like workhorses for the rodeos. And he had one and he assigned it to me, and it was named Lonesome. And I thought it was super metal because it was like the one black horse of the family that we ever had.
Nice.
And Lonesome was a lonesome horse, man. He would just sit, but stand in the field, in the middle of winter, and how it kind of ties into the book, even though not directly, is I used to sit and watch those horses when I was a kid. And when I was there, I typically felt quite isolated and disconnected. This was in Colorado, just by the nature of my family dynamic and whatnot. And
what age was this about?
Probably like 9, 10, 11, around then. So I'd be super lonesome, and my dad would be out to work, and I was the only kid at that point. And so I'd look out at these horses, especially in the winter, and they'd just be standing there just in the snow by themselves, especially the lonesome one. And they're just like standing, staring into space, and I felt so much compassion for them. I thought they must have been freezing or just bored, and there's no grass to eat. They're just kind of stuck in a field.
Yeah.
And I really related to that because that's how I felt inside.
Damn.
But anyway, yeah, like I said, has really very little to do with the book. But I mean, not the theme, because the book is essentially around loneliness. It just so happened that I had that horse, and then there's another interesting correlation I realized yesterday, actually, as I was drafting. Part of the book has to do with my former intimate relationship with heroin. And that was one of the failed coping mechanisms to my feeling of isolation and loneliness.
Wow.
And I was writing, we never called it this because it's kind of before my time, but back in the day, your William Burroughs junkies called it horse.
Yeah.
Because it's strong. It's got a lot of power. So there's a lot of correlations to that particular word that are coming up as I go through the process. But what's interesting about it, I think, we'll find out because there's a crowd of people watching. Interest is subjective after all.
For sure.
So I've been doing this podcast that I do for, I don't know, now 8-9 years, something like that. And as a result, a lot of public speaking and a lot of sharing of ideas, some my own, sometimes eliciting those ideas from other people in whom I'm interested. And so I think it was around 2020 when I got together with my wife, Allison. She was in the process of writing her book, Animal Power. And poor thing, I'm sorry, sweetie. We lived in Laurel Canyon in LA, and we had like a really big bedroom. So it had kind of a room for a desk and a little quasi living room. It was an interesting setup, kind of a tree house. And she'd be up there writing on this tiny little desk, on my old busted ass iMac and with shitty internet, but she got it done. But anyway, I was watching her do her book, and a lot of my contemporaries, friends and peers had written books. And I just started to get the idea that was something that maybe I should do. Everyone's doing it. All the cool kids are doing it. And it's like, if you're someone who does speaking for a living, it's kind of makes sense as a next step. And so actually it's probably before that, maybe even a year before that, I got the idea. I guess that's the thing you do. Kind of as a calling card, more as just a business play kind of thing, right? It's like author of blah, blah, blah. You just kind of, hire a ghostwriter, and now you have a book, and now you can call yourself an author, like a business positioning sort of thing. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but what happened was I could not motivate myself to write one goddamn word. And it was like this nagging thing that sort of evolved into a sense of guilt, because I started talking about, hey, I think I'm going to write a book. Oh, really? And people would ask me, hey, what's up with your book? I'm like, well, nothing really, And I just could not get the thing off the ground, And as you know, as a creative person, I'm sure many people here share this in their own way. It's like, you have to build up the inertia by starting it. Like once you start something, it's like doing breath work today. I'm always like, oh God, I'm going to go sit in my car. I can't do this. And I'm like, God, just go get a few in after a couple minutes, right? Jogging. Yes. I mean, anything, right? But especially with creative projects, I find that to be true. And I just could not get it going. Like I couldn't come up with the idea. I couldn't start writing, nothing. I went then, and this is when Allison was writing her book. I went and did my first intentional mushroom ceremony with Harry. Have you met Harry the healer?
I haven't.
Yeah, he's a very skilled shaman. And I had only ever, taken mushrooms as a way to attempt to escape myself back in the day, which, by the way, for anyone listening, psychedelics are a horrible way to try to escape from yourself. As I learned the hard way. But, I've been sober for a long time. And at that point, I had a few ayahuasca journeys under my belt, and I was interested in continuing with that healing. And so I went up to this house in Laurel Canyon and sat just in a private with Harry. And during that ceremony, which is a story that could take 5 podcasts. The thing that is pertinent to this conversation is I started thinking about this book, like, what the fuck is going on here? I'm supposed to be doing this thing and I can't do it. Kind of reaching into consciousness to form some sort of idea or even to make a decision to not do it because I was struggling with it so bad. And anyway, what happened was the title of the book just jumped in my lap. And Cookie, my dog, was also my she was in the journey with me. She loves to go on journeys. It's definitely a great add-on. But yeah, the title came to me and I was like, oh, that's a cool title. What does that mean? And then what I was shown was the reason that I was not motivated to start the process or really able to get that fire started, so to speak, was because I was approaching it from a completely selfish motive. It's like, it never had occurred to me like, hey, maybe I could write something that would help people. Right? Never.
Yeah.
I was like, I want something good that makes me look good. It was like, I want to make money. I want people to recognize me as having some sort of status or something, And I was like, oh my God, how pathetic. It was like so embarrassing to, be as developed as I thought I was at that point. And I was in many ways, but in terms of this particular project, it was like, wow, no wonder I'm not motivated by it. And that was embarrassing, but it was also a beautiful realization because it told me something about my heart that felt really good.
How powerful that is. It's like, yeah, it's a great reminder.
Felt really good.
Yes.
It was like, wow, cool. Not that there's anything wrong with being motivated by money or prestige or anything like that, because, it gets shit done at a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really neat to see. It was like it was very affirming for me to see like, wow, that's interesting. You've come a long way that you can't do something just for your own benefit. Yeah. And then of course, like the kind of the concept around the book, the idea started to flesh out that night. And then it was like a fire lit in my belly that I could not, there's no way I could have not done it at that point because I realized the potential that I had and that it had to really impact a few people. I don't know how many people, but I sensed that if I could compartmentalize some of the wisdom that I've earned through my life experiences, that, regardless of how many people experienced the finished product, that it could be deeply impactful. And so it became completely about an act of service, much less so than what it might do for me. And now that I'm at this stage in the process, I realize like, you don't make any money writing books. No. I got a great advance, and I think for, a first-time author and all of that, but then, you've got like your marketing, you don't have to hire an editor, but I chose to hire an expensive editor so that I don't like go off the rails and waste time and not be ready for my deadlines and things like that. So it's definitely not, at least in the immediate, something that's going to have a financial impact on one's life, I think. But the process is super fun now that I'm in it. But man, it's just, it's all encompassing, I think, also due to the fact that now it's become so important to me because of the intentionality behind it. And that's also freeing because there's much less relevance in terms of how I look in the process.
Yeah, there's removed that
largely
that ego piece.
You can never totally remove it.
No.
Obviously, I want people to think it's awesome and that I'm brilliant, but but more than anything, I just want to meet that one person that's like, holy shit, I read your book and it changed my life.
Well, I love the approach that you're taking too. I think about coaching people, and I think about the people who have had the greatest impact in my life. They've just shared their own experiences and not like, hey, go do this way. It's like, this is what I did, and I was kind of fucking some things up, and I stayed with it, and I got like, I am a flawed individual, and I think there are a lot of people out there like that. Unfortunately, we see a lot of things out on social media where people they got it figured out. And I think the way I've always known you, the way you've approached your podcast, the way you've approached any conversation we've had, it's always been kimono open, and I'm a flawed individual, and I'm excited to be able to experience that through your book. And I know you had shared with me your what do you call it when you put the book together? The
Proposal, yeah.
brother.
I mean, that in and of itself is like almost too much.
How long was that? How many pages was that?
I mean, I think it's a positive attribute generally, and it pays off, but I'm kind of extra. You know what I mean? Like when I showed my proposal to Neil, have you met Neil Strauss yet?
No, very familiar with him.
so,
Yeah,
You know, it's a
total gangster in the field.
old friend of mine from LA, and you know, a great contemporary author of nonfiction. And I'm like really bad at asking for help, and we're not like besties, you know. And we've spent some time together, and I've spoken at a number of his events, and we text every now and then, but it's, you know, we're not like super close. So I didn't feel like I could call him and be like, "Hey, you're a famous author, 10 times, you know, New York Times bestseller. I'm writing a book." Like, how many people call that guy and say that? I'm not going to be that guy. But anyway, we happened to be having a conversation one day just to catch up, and organically, I just said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, you know, I just put together this book proposal." And he goes, "You did what?" And I'm like, "Write a proposal." He goes, "Nah, you don't write the proposal. It's not how you do it." I'm like, "What?" "Yeah, you write a proposal, you get an agent, and then they get you a publishing deal." He's like, No, don't do that. Just write the book, finish it, and then shop the book." I was like, "Well, kind of too late. You know, I'm already invested in this process." Yeah, so that was kind of deflating.
Sure. Yeah,
But
understandable.
you know, coming from someone, I was like kind of embarrassed to even say I'm writing a book.
Right.
You know, I was like, he's like, "You already did it wrong."
Well, he didn't have great bedside manner, if
Yeah.
we're being honest. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, well, maybe you could try.
And Rick Rubin told me the same thing. I think because they had just
Jeez.
done a book together, and you know, he told me, "Oh, I'm about to put my book out," and I said, "Oh, let's do a podcast." And I said, "You know, modestly, I'm kind of doing a little book too, writing the proposal." And he's like, No, you don't want to do a proposal." I'm like, "You guys shut the fuck up. Like, I'm way too deep in this proposal process to go back." But anyway, what happened was I started to get together a pretty good framework of what I wanted to do in 2020, and watching Allison's process and seeing her like just persevere in the amount of heart, soul, and dedication she put into her book, and also some of the publishing industry politics that she had to navigate due to the subject matter of her book and the strange, politically correct, bizarre clown world that we live in. And she just fucking held the line and advocated for herself and put out a beautiful book and a card deck. So that was really inspiring. And so I had a fire under my ass, and I really started piecing together this proposal. And another thing Neil told me is like, "Oh, you don't need like all this fancy PDF and marketing stuff." He goes, "Publishers buy books just like a Word document with a basic outline." I was like, really? I don't know. I don't feel like they'd buy mine. So I'm like, I'm going to make the most beautiful proposal of all time, you know? And I think it probably is, because I spent 3 fucking years making a proposal when, you know, established authors would write 2 or 3 books in that time. But the reason that it was so arduous was because 2020 happened. You know, kind of right when I started. And then we essentially chose to flee California, kind of, or California, as I like to call it now, as almost like refugees. Like, we got to get out of here. This is getting weird. And then we moved here to Texas and bought a house, and then went through a year and a half of a really challenging renovation project and so on. And reluctantly, I just had to like put it aside. So it's a lot of like stopping and starting. And then finally I had to accept my limitations in terms of my bandwidth and just the amount of stress it was causing to try to manage all the things all at once. And when we moved into our house, I was like, okay, I'm diving back in. So for anyone that is interested in writing a book, I don't know. It still seems to me, based on my agent's feedback, that we needed a real proposal. And even after I got her, Jadri, shout out to Jadri, who's amazing. She still had me work for a couple months, just like refining the proposal, and also wanted to include a lot of fleshed out, edited sample material. And I think part of that is, this is getting a little of the industry jargon, but it might be helpful to
Well, I think it's
someone.
interesting because most people, don't know shit about this. They know plenty of people who've written books, and
Right.
I think gone the path that you've talked about. Like, yeah, you get a ghostwriter, you self-publish it. These books out,
Right.
boom.
Well, one thing that I learned working with my agent in terms of the landscape of the industry is that in the past few years, if you had a big podcast or a decent sized social media following, publishers might just sign you and give you a decent advance based on a simple Word document, because they just look at your numbers and they're like, oh, they have a following, they'll sell books.
Okay.
But from what I was told, a lot of there's kind of big five publishers, a lot of them have been burned by people with large audiences who don't move books. Either they don't promote it, or their audiences don't care that they put out a book.
And they don't, if they look at what they sell for their products, they don't sell shit for products. Now, you're different than that.
Right.
You can move, you move a lot of weight.
I thought I would be able to rely on my reach a little bit more than I was. They were like, yeah, we don't care. We want to see a really fleshed out proposal. And so that was, a much longer process than it probably needed to be, based on my perfectionism and also the world just dramatically changing during that time.
Before we get into the book, I actually do want to understand a little bit more of that process. And so the agent shops the book. Let's just skip to, you get the someone signs on, you get the advance. At what point did you start like really sitting down to write the book? And I understand you probably fleshed out some concepts already, but when did you feel like you started writing the book?
Well, there's another funny piece to it that,
of course,
that happens before that. So my agent had reached out to me many years ago, and I guess she heard my podcast or something. She said, hey, have you ever thought about writing a book? I was like, yeah, maybe someday. And I just saved that email. I always save emails like that, and I have folders, like the someday folder. So I reached out back to her, and she was super down. Let's do it. She loved the idea. But even with that very, meaty and like high value proposal, she felt very confident based on the proposal and the fact that, I do have a bit of an audience, that it would be a no-brainer when we took it to auction, which is how they do it, right? So they kind of release it to all the publishers, and then ideally there's a dogfight over who gets the deal, and that kind of ups the ante on your advance and stuff. So she shops it around.
Oh, God.
And they're all saying no. They're like, not interested. Why?
Not a dogfight.
No, why? We're talking about we want to go for the big ones, right? There's, like I said, there's, 5 kind of main publishing houses, and then they have subsidiaries or imprints, right, under them. Harper's, blah, blah, blah. So she emails me and is like, yeah, we got to get on the phone and talk about this. It's not going well. And I was like, oh shit, like all the shit I put into it. Like, if you're going to tell me I got to self-publish at this point, when I chose to, like, no ghostwriter, no self-publish, I'm doing the real deal. What happened was that they found my views to be problematic. Yeah, because we're now entering into the realm of mainstream media.
Oh,
right.
Because you're in the big 5.
Yeah. And so, and I still haven't, I thought it would be depressing to find out exactly what they had a problem with. So I don't know. I might ask her someday when it's all said and done, like, what was it that I said or did? Because I feel like I'm a pretty warm, caring person. I don't view myself as someone who's trying to cause trouble. But I was pretty outspoken during the 2020 experience, and had some people on my podcast that were very counter to the predominant narrative and so on. And, I'm known to not be a huge fan of the government in general and things like that, pharmaceuticals, yada, yada. Right. So probably something to do with that. Or you pretty much have Alex Jones on your podcast, and that's the kiss of death. It might have just been that.
Yeah, and it might not have been anything in the proposal. It's just...
Oh, yeah, no, they loved the book.
Okay,
that's
so it was literally
I was like, she's like, oh, everyone's really into it. But then they did some due diligence, I think, and we're like, actually, we love the book, but you're like,
You're a bit of a problem.
Yeah. And then one came through, and I hope they're not listening. I guess we already signed. I keep the money. But... but no one said anything like, oh, don't talk about this on your podcast. We need you to tone it down here or there, and, watch it on social media. They just, I don't know, they seem to be down. So that was the first part. It was like a little bit, it was a little deflating because I feel like I said, I know my heart. I'm not out in the world to hurt anyone. I'm really trying
You're just questioning a lot of things.
I'm trying to help people.
Yeah.
And, but the powers that be, I mean, you got to think about the multinational corporations that own the media and own the publishing houses. If you go up the ladder of control, well, these are the same organizations that own the companies that I'm talking shit about a lot.
Absolutely.
Right. So, I get it. I don't take it personally. It's just like, oh man, would I do anything different? No, I literally have to be authentic. And if I think something and it's appropriate to say it publicly, I'm going to say it, even if it hurts my career or whatever. So that's the first part. But as far as like the writing, I've been chugging away at it for a while now. But once the deal, was in ink and everyone had agreed, then you're given a deadline, which for me, it's just funny, like, because we're recording it this time. The manuscript's due in April of 2025, which seems like a long way away. But when you're talking about like 11 edited chapters, time goes fast, son. I mean, I'm like, whoa. So I have 2 or 3 done, that are done enough to turn in at this point. But once that clock started ticking, then it's like pretty much a daily thing. I even have a little, like a little beaded necklace that I hang on my office door when I'm writing. And that's
I can't go in.
Do not disturb.
Yeah.
I still knock sometimes.
Oh, of
Yeah.
course. That's
So if I'm
important.
just screwing around or doing emails, then I take it off. But that's
Yeah.
like my do not disturb sign. And, when I'm in there, I mean, I'm in there for hours and hours because sometimes it's like, you do like, there's a couple different ways to write. There's bulk writing, which is just get the ideas out. Some people call it a shitty first draft or a vomit draft. There's different names for it. And it's drafting, right? You just like put out the main idea and then you get into the process of crafting later on. You kind of finish the whole thing, then you start over and kind of craft your way through each chapter. But the way I'm doing it is with, an editor in real time. So there's a lot of crafting along the way. So it feels very slow in the process, but ideally, the hope is at least that there's less kind of backfill at the end when you finally turn the thing in. It's hopefully going to be a bit more polished and require less refinement, which is why I'm doing it that way. But yeah, it's not for the faint at heart, man. I see why people just hire ghostwriters. And I found out after I started this, because there's so many people I interview on my podcast and you too. I mean, they have, New York Times bestsellers and huge books. And now that I'm a little bit more on the inside, most of these guys are using ghostwriters. Like very few people write their own book.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah. And, no shade. Now I really understand why.
Yeah.
And next time I'll probably do that.
Yeah. So like on a weekly basis, or like what's a typical, like when you're in writing mode, what's a typical day look like for you?
Procrastinate doing all the shit that is not writing the book for the first 4 or 5 hours of the day.
Nice.
That seems really important, like weeding the lawn that is not even growing. She knows. Inner battle with resistance. And then at some point I put on my Newcom focus tracks. I put on my Brown's gas inhaler. And when those 2 things are on, I mean, it looks like a science lab in my writing room. It's ridiculous.
Not surprised.
But it's like my signal when that shit's on, and like now, and I use this app called Freedom, which you can like set it to block anything on your computer. So I have mine to block all social media, so that I don't like, well, I'm just going to look on Twitter for a second, and then it's like 4 hours go by that I could have been writing.
Yeah.
Looking at shit that I have no control over and just wanting to say things that I can't say to people because it would be not spiritual and get me, lose my book deal.
Yeah.
But that's really, no, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there is like typically a lot of resistance to get ramped up. But the beautiful thing is once I start, I mean, you can't pull me out of that chair. Like I just can't stop, which is really, really fun. And, it's interesting because sometimes it's like a high word count. And you feel like, oh, I just spent 4, 5, 6 hours. And you're like, wow, there's a couple pages. Sometimes the same amount of time is like gnawing on 2 paragraphs. So it's interesting to not be hard on oneself In other words, like not to judge, and this goes for, I think, for any kind of creative work, if you're painting or writing songs or sculpting, whatever, right? It's like, it's not so much about the amount of work got done, it's the quality of the work. And sometimes like one sentence or one paragraph just takes a lot of refining to get it to a place where you're like, that's it. Yeah. And then I'm sure you turn it in and the editor's like, psych, that's not it. Do it again. But to feel good about it at the end of the day, like, I didn't make a lot of progress in terms of the number of words, the number of pages, but I made progress in terms of even my own understanding of the overall theme or concepts that I'm intending to convey. When it starts to kind of coalesce and you see, oh, this is making sense. There's somewhat of a linear progression of ideas that are taking the reader somewhere and keeping them engaged. And you kind of know that by how engaged it keeps you as you're writing it. If I start to drift off, I'm like, oh, this is getting too academic or analytical or too dry. It needs a little more humanity.
A little more you.
Yeah. And then sometimes it's like way too much me. And
Yeah.
then my editor's like, yeah, what do they call it? Heightened language. They're like, it's a little heavy in the heightened language, which means like, it sounds like you're trying to be a writer.
Okay.
Right. Where it's like too descriptive and kind of esoteric and dreamy. And they're kind of like, all right, they'll be like, can you ground this a little more?
Okay.
All right, I get it. Or the feedback is like, this sounds like a little pedestrian or academic, because you start writing about something, you dig in, and the smarty pants part of the brain starts to override maybe the heart of the creative part, and then it comes out like an essay or something instead of a piece that's really going to move someone.
Are you working with the editor on a daily basis?
Weekly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Which is really good for accountability. Like I have a deadline usually every Monday, and then we meet on Wednesdays, and there's a lot of track changes. We use Word documents, and I'll like think something's totally done, and they're like, psych, boom, boom, boom. I was like, back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
But what's cool, Cal, is it's such a pleasure to be learning a new skill. That's the thing. It's like, I don't know how to do this. I have no idea. So it's, there's something very rewarding about learning a creative art, a craft that you don't know how to do. So there's other creative things I do, and I feel like I've kind of like gotten like playing guitar. I'm like probably about as good at it as I'm ever going to be. Not probably good enough to do it professionally, but I'm good enough to entertain myself with it.
Yeah, and us on a Tuesday night.
Every once in a while, yeah.
Spacewood.
But this is like a whole new thing because it's multifaceted, and also because the nature of the work is deeply personal. It's also like cathartic and very therapeutic and terrifying at times.
Just to like get the beginning of that share, because eventually it's shared worldwide, but like right now you're just getting it out onto paper.
Yeah.
What's your biggest fear, if you've thought about it all? Like you think about the book and publishing it, getting it out there, like what's maybe keeps you up at night sometimes when you think about the book?
That's easy. So I'm pretty good at letting go of attachments to results, right? Like I just do things and then pretty skilled at just letting them go and not seeing what's on the other side of it. So I don't really have expectations. So I'm not afraid of like, oh, is it going to be popular or good? People are going to, it's just whatever. Because I'm doing it from a place of service, as I said. So that removes 90% of the fear, because it's not even about me. It's about, like I said, someone listening to it or reading it and going like, oh shit, and having it motivate them to think about things differently or to change themselves or to elicit some level of transformation. So that's not very scary. What's scary right now is the chapter that I'm about to start, which I have fleshed out a little bit, that is around childhood trauma. And the book is about loneliness. And so just to back up a little bit.
Did you know from the beginning it was, I'm going to write a book about this?
No, I didn't. I learned that in Neil Strauss's Writer's Mastermind. It's a group I did for a number of months, and I didn't even know what a theme was or that you needed one, and that was one of the exercises. And so in between our weekly calls with this small group of writers, I came up with some ideas for my theme, and then I shared it on the Zoom, and Neil was like, "That's not a theme. That's
Mhm.
like a philosophy." I was like, "Fuck, what's a theme?" And then I realized, oh, at the core of this thing, it's really about loneliness. It's about how we feel disconnected,
Mm.
at different times in our life, and some of the things that we do to create a feeling of connection and oneness, many of which are destructive, especially in my case with addiction and whatnot, and actually further isolate you into yourself, into the mind, into ego. So that's the essential idea of it. And in this particular chapter, so it's kind of based on a foundation of a narrative of my life experience, but not as much a memoir as like, here's this crazy thing that happened. Here's how it pertains to this underlying existential loneliness. Here's what made it worse. And here are some things that are making it better, right? To give it very simplistic terms. But this chapter about childhood trauma, oh man, that shit is crazy. So to me, at least, it's really quite daunting. So when I was around 5 or 6, I was molested by my babysitter. And something I started, I didn't tell anyone until I was 14. I got sent to this like cult boarding school, not far from your place in Idaho, northern
We've
Idaho.
had some great conversations about
Yeah, I
that
mean, it's a
place.
totally bizarre experience. But there's a lot of group therapy and things like that. So I started to process that, and over the years, did all kinds of therapy about it and journaling and anything I could do to really try and heal it, to reconcile that experience, to find some level of forgiveness and understanding around it. And before I started working with plant medicines, I thought I was good with it. I was just like, I could talk about it without a charge. I didn't feel it was really affecting my life. And the first time I drank ayahuasca, I realized, oh, you have not even begun to deal with this, as a core wound that really, really, truly has shaped my entire life. I mean, it's just, there's no other way to say it. It's just anyone that's had that kind of experience knows, no matter how much, at least for me, no matter how much healing I've done, it's not like it's ever gone.
There's always like a scar. There's
it's not like an alt delete, like, oh, I cried about it a lot and,
You did
took some medicine and like
to...
realized how much it hurt me and now I'm good. It's just, it's kind of there, And so,
By the way, I this is like I think a big message for me. I have my own core wounds that came up, particularly in my first Aya experience, which was earlier this year. And it's the pattern I keep repeating. And, had a beautiful experience and got much deeper into that core wound in a unconscious way this past summer. And it's just a reminder that this is a part of me. And I don't believe it'll ever heal completely. It's just when I'm starting to get sucked into the dark side of it, can I have the awareness, the consciousness to recognize it and start to unwind what got me down that road? So I'm just, I think this is like not just central to, the capital T trauma that you're talking about. I think we each, at least in my kind of limited experience and speaking with others about their own kind of upbringing and those things that they've carried forth, which in a lot of cases brought them, created some maladaptive, we would say, but right, some strategies that got us through and allowed us to succeed, largely survive, but a lot of us were thriving because of this thing that happened, or this idea, this feeling that this happened because of this. And so I'm not going to let that happen again. And I'll do all these things so it doesn't happen again. And for a lot of people, that it turns into achievement in the way that our culture, holds it in high regard, and it just becomes this kind of almost like self-perpetuating thing until you have the awareness like, oh fuck, there's some good that came out of it, but at its core, like I need to understand that I am getting sucked into this thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because with, like you said, capital or lowercase t trauma, I mean, I don't think anyone gets out of this life without some type of trauma, right? And
it's all, and it's perceived for a lot of us.
I mean, I always like to quote Bob Marley, every man's burden is the heaviest, you know? So you might have had a really healthy, beautiful, loving family, but you were the middle child and your older brother was a football star and your younger sister was the, you know, the A student, and you're kind of just left there being ignored, right? And that's your trauma. It's like what didn't happen for you. It's not necessarily what does happen to you, right? Sometimes it's a sin of omission. Sometimes there are sins of commission. I don't know which is worse. I've had a lot of both. A lot of neglect in my childhood and a lot of abuse in many ways. But it's like, I think at the different levels of healing around this particular experience for me, I'm not a big spiritual bypasser, right? So it's like, I can kind of sense if there's something there that's got some meat on the bone, like, all right, you know, it might take me a minute, but I'll get in there and I will face it. I will look at it. I will feel it. And I had gone through so many iterations of that particular experience reemerging in my awareness, and then dive right into it and then think it's gone, right? And not bypassing, just like, there's no charge left. I feel like it's gone. And also coming to a point of realization that, I don't know if it would be classified specifically as spiritual bypassing, but when we're able to see the gift in an experience in which we were hurt, it's easy to kind of discount that there could be some scars there still, right?
So really well said. Yeah.
I think as I've addressed this particular issue on my healing journey, there have been many times where I've been able to fully reconcile it in that, well, you know what? The person that hurt me, chances are pretty high that they were hurt by someone else, and there's a karmic sort of implication there. Well, who did I hurt in another lifetime where it started, you know, there was a debt to pay, so to speak, not to victim shame myself, but this is just the way my worldview is inclusive of this idea. And then looking at the outcome, well, you know, I became a drug addict, I almost killed myself. But because of that, I was forced into spirituality, you know, as the only means by which I could survive and, you know, get sober and all of that. So I could look back on it at one point and say, wow, you know, I mean, I don't know if I would choose it per se, but I most of the time like the person that I am today. I feel pretty good about myself and the way I move in the world. And so who knows if I would be the same awesome person had that super shitty thing never happened to me, right? And would I have the same kind of devotion that I have to God and the same depth of surrender that makes my life largely free of suffering, you know? So any experience, I think, can be transmuted into a gift, but there is a risk in there of going like, I've worked through it. It's all love and light now. Where's my crystals? It's like, well, have you really felt the impact of that experience? So to your question before, I feel like very equipped and emotionally stable enough to write about that experience. But, as I started to kind of map it out, I got the idea. It's like one of those ideas you almost wish you could put back in the box, you know, but now I can't, especially now that I'm going to be talking about it.
We're not editing this.
I had the idea maybe I should try and track down this the perpetrator and have a conversation with them. About what? I don't know. Why? I'm not even sure. I just feel like there's some closure that I need that could be made available by my willingness to include the documentation of that process as part of this chapter. Because I can tell the stories all day long without really, it's just, I've dealt with it, right? But contacting the person, that's a whole other animal, right? But I got the idea and I just thought, fuck, now I got to do this, or do I? I don't know. I think I do right now, or I choose to. So I start internet sleuthing. And I mean, I'm pretty good at research, and spent a couple months trying to find this person through old neighbors. I mean, we're talking about 1976, right? I mean, a lot of the people that live there are dead, or, I don't know how to find them. Started tracking them down, asking my mom if she knew their name. And I narrowed it down to, I remember his first name, but I narrowed it down to the last name. I was like, this is it. Everyone has corroborated that this is the guy's name. So I started trying to find this person. He's a ghost. Like, there's no record of this person anywhere on the internet, anywhere in the world. I mean, all social media, all these like find anyone websites. I'm signing up for those. I'm putting in all this information. I can't find anything. And then finally, I find the guy that must be him, he's about 10 years older than me. He was 15 at the time of this. And I won't say his name, but I found who I thought was the guy, and he's a therapist who specializes in sexual issues and, whatever kind of stuff. Right? He's in the Bay Area, and he's a very rainbow kind of therapist, And I was like, that's the fucking guy. And so I start building this narrative. Oh, so you go around and you hurt little kids, and then you grow up and make money helping those kind of people recover from the shit you did. And I started building this whole story, and I was like, all right, well, now I know I think I know who the guy is. All the boxes are checked. And so I start thinking of ideas. Well, how can I contact this person? What do I say? Right. And, so I had this idea, well, I could book a therapy session with him.
That's the first thing I thought about.
And start processing my trauma with him, and then go, actually, it was you, motherfucker. Let's talk about it. Which was terrifying, to say the least.
Yeah.
Luckily for me, or not, maybe that would have been the easy route. I was like, well, before I do that, I want to be sure. And so I hired a private investigator, thanks to you, I think, Jared. Yeah. Didn't you connect me with the guy? So I hired a legit PI. In 10 minutes, he finds the guy. He's alive. Why I couldn't find him is I had one letter in the last name wrong. And so I have a whole dossier on this person now who is still alive, and I have everything I could ever want to know about them. And so to your question, what's the hardest part of the book? It's getting to that part and making decisions that could be extremely impactful for me, and assuming for people that read it that have had similar experiences, And so I kind of have to decide what I'm going to do, because it's going to be part of the story, right? And a lot of the theme of that particular chapter is around forgiveness and reconciling ways in which we've been truly victimized. Because there's most of the situations in my life in which I've been victimized, I played a major role in through my own stupidity, selfishness, ignorance, etc. I can't really think of actually any other situations in which I was truly, uninvolved. Mm-hmm. And this would be one. Like I literally did nothing to bring this upon myself. So when it comes to forgiveness, I've had so many places at which I've arrived where I really felt like I was able to forgive this person. And then I hit certain levels of that, especially in the medicine space, where I don't think I can, and I don't think I do. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'm even supposed to. Right? And I don't have the answer to that. No. And so if I'm going to write about forgiveness, especially in the context of something that is so grievous as this, I kind of have to figure it out. I feel like I need to come to some level of understanding, some sort of plateau, so that I can complete at least my current process of it. And I'm pretty sure that is going to include having some sort of a communication with this person, so that I think my intention at this point would be to really, with a great sense of finality, sever any karmic ties between myself and this person. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like there's still a connection there, no matter how much I've worked on just like putting that to the side. And so that's terrifying. I mean, sit down at your desk and like, do I make the call now? Like, I had to find an app that records calls because I need a transcript, I won't be able to remember. I'm probably going to be so emotional. I mean, I'll be in a blackout, So it's like, doing that would be scary enough on its own, but doing it in the context of trying to actually make sense of it and build it into a framework of understanding or kind of a philosophy that I want to share with people about how we are able to overcome some of these experiences that some of us are, unfortunately prone to having. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That's
Yeah.
wow.
Thanks for asking.
Certainly deeply personal, and it's you and I and others like love being curious, and it's like it's not always fucking roses when you figure shit out. It's like,
right.
oh, so now I kind of have to do
Yeah.
something, or do I? Or now you're stuck
Yeah.
in this other place. But to your point about, I thought I was good with all this and forgiveness and healing, and I'm not. And so, like, is this gonna get me closer to that place? It's a big leap from what you've been doing in some ways. It's as shown by your emotion and your, as you said, being terrified of truly confronting that.
It's also it's part of the gift / curse of one's commitment to authenticity, right? Because I could write that chapter and just be like, yeah, I'm good, and here's how I figured it all out, and
yes,
we're done.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not true. I'm in a process with it. So, why not vulnerably share that process? Because the people that have been most impactful in my healing journey and various levels of spiritual awakening have been people that were ruthlessly honest about their own experience and have been vulnerable in a way that has given me permission to be that vulnerable. I mean, having this conversation, even if no one was listening to the podcast and it was just these people, I mean, there would have been a time where I'd be like, hell no. Yeah. Like, we'll talk about this later, Cal,
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm sure there's going to be someone that listens to this podcast, and maybe even someone here in our studio audience that has had a similar kind of experience, whether it was the same particular flavor of trauma, but we've all been hurt, and so maybe by me being willing to kind of take some of the arrows of the process,
Yeah, for sure.
Not to say that this is going to be the path for everyone who's experienced something like that, but people might be able to find their own version of reconciliation and arrive at their own relationship to forgiveness, or to be, if at the very least, to be able to see the gift in some of the painful experiences of our lives and how those harms that we endure can really be transmuted and used to shape our character, and can also be tremendously useful as a catalyst for empathy and compassion. When you've really looked at your suffering and you've been willing to face it squarely and relive whatever parts of it you need to relive to try and move past it. For me, it gives me just a tremendous level of love for other people. And a preordained grace, right? The suffering involved in the human experience, in the collective, in the individual, is just like, wow, this shit we signed up for is hard. Even if you have a relatively easy life, like I said, we all experience pain subjectively. So, if you break your knee, it's a broken knee to you that's going to feel different to my broken knee that might be less or more severe, right? It's like we're each feeling our own internal pain as strong as the next person, So, imagine a world where people really were able to cultivate the willingness to do their shadow work and address and face their core wounds. Imagine the empathy and compassion that would come from that, in terms of the collective, right? I mean, even people that I would, I have like my imaginary enemies of the world, the evildoers that I think are running the stuff, but they're probably just the gophers for the people that are really running things. And I'll feel hatred in my heart for these people sometimes, the people that are, whose actions are antithetical to life and antithetical to humanity, to freedom, are in opposition to any definition of love. And I'll find myself, I'm such a loving person that I hate that person and want them to die. It's like, is that, wait, that I'm them then, right? So to me, it's like a great marker of my own progress when I can not co-sign or, go along with someone who, say, is harming other people or something like that, but to also have the understanding that they're just deeply hurt people and that hurt people. And which is scary, because if everyone's hurt, everyone's going to keep hurting people. But conversely, healed people heal people. The more work each of us do as an individual, we carry that work with us into the world. I'm going to be much less likely to be rude and abusive to a gas station clerk because of the work I've done on my own hurt. Any healing I've done is going to be represented just by who I am. I don't have to do anything to be nice to the clerk or get social credit, for being like, did you see like the tip I just left the waiter? I used to do that shit. I'd like do something nice just to show off, Oh, it's so gross.
Yeah. It's part of our evolution.
As we really commit to our individual healing, then it's not even about what you do. It's just the essence of who you are as you move through the world. You have a healing effect on anyone with whom you share space, just by the nature of your consciousness, and that you've identified who and what you really are to a greater degree as you've climbed out of your past and your trauma and your patterns and programming. And you realize like, wow, I really am a spiritual being that seems to have come here and is utilizing this body to get something done. Well, what am I getting done? Evolution, And without the pain, where's the evolution?
Yeah, without that challenge.
Right?
And
if you just popped out with complete, Buddha-like non-attachment and Jesus-like forgiveness, then kind of what's the point of being here in a body and going through the shit that we go through as human beings? There has to be a purpose to it. Otherwise, I don't want to do it.
Well, there's no contrast if you're just this thing, right? That's the whole idea, is we need the dark and the light to be able to experience.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful place to end. This portion. If anyone has questions, we'll certainly take a few. But yeah, thanks for everything today, for your share, and really, I always love sitting and talking with you, especially with the mics on, so that people my audience in particular gets to hear kind of your process, what you're going through, who you are, the things you struggle with. I appreciate you. I love you, brother. Thank you.
You too. I mean, that's the cool thing about being on podcasts or hosting podcasts, especially with your friends like us, is we wouldn't have had this deep of a conversation if we just sat down here under the oak tree, right? How you doing? Oh, cool. Yeah, I was up in Idaho playing a bit of golf. I mean, not like we're that surface and vapid, but we're not going to talk about probably what we just talked about.
Yeah.
But in service of the greater good and in service of us all waking up to who we really are, then man, what a gift to be able to share space, and what a gift that there's two people out there in the world that even want to listen to a conversation like this.
Yeah.
I would say the vast majority of people don't. But those aren't the people I'm trying to talk to.
No. Right.
I mean, God bless, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
There's many people I don't want to listen to either, right?
It's, sure.
I remember when I first started back in the day reading Eckhart Tolle and listening to his audiobooks. I'd have it on in the car, and certain people would be like, his voice is so annoying. I'm just like, you don't get it, man. You know what I'm saying? You're looking at the messenger, not the message. And so
I've heard more than a few people say that about
I'm
his
like,
voice.
This is brilliant. What are you talking about? I can listen to this all day, So yeah, there's an audience for everyone, I guess.
Yeah. Are there any questions or thoughts or anything? And again, we're good to wrap here if no one's.
I was on the edge of my seat. You guys shared so beautifully. I was really captivated by your whole story, and of course the whole second half on trauma. And I don't have a single question, and I loved every second of it. So I don't know if anyone else feels differently.
Wait, one question: was the therapist guy the PI found?
No.
Oh, it was another
Yeah,
guy.
I had the name wrong. Yeah, I had the goddamn name wrong. Thank God. You know what I mean? It's like, how awkward. But
I don't know. That would have been a cool part of the book.
I
dude.
know. Maybe I should just keep that.
Yeah.
You know? But I wrote in the introduction, like, this book has no lies in it. You know, it's all true, at least to the best of my memory, kind of thing. But yeah, no, I had one letter in the name wrong. But it was crazy how it added up. I was like, definitely the guy. Like, everything else matched.
Oh, and then that he's a doctor.
Yeah.
That was wild.
What's funny, kind of, is that the real person is not a therapist. I don't even know if I should say this, but fuck it.
We can cut this out if we have to.
You know, it doesn't matter. The real guy works for the IRS.
Of course.
I'm like, you can't make this shit up. Not to be crass, but what I said when I learned that, he went from fucking little kids to fucking adults. Of course. Yeah. That was quite crass, actually. But I mean, sometimes you just, you know, if you're not laughing, you're crying. You know what I mean?
Travis.
I look forward to hearing how that all resolves for you.
Thank you.
The course you choose to take and however it writes.
Me too, brother. I'm asking for guidance, you know, on a human and non-human.
I have a question.
Yes,
dear.
It's just a curiosity for both of you. I just love you both so much. You're just, I mean, your beaming lights, your smiles, your sweet souls. And it's a very kind of 101 curiosity, but you're both such open, willing, on the path men, and you both, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, struggle to, like, I know that you guys have your friends, but why is it hard for both of you to ask for help? Or why is it challenging at times for men like you? I would think that men like you, because you're open to vulnerabilities and connection and open heart, that it would not be a challenge, but I don't know. And I know you guys both have friends, and I know you have close friends, Kyle, but sometimes I tell Luke, I'm like, will you call Kyle more? Like, I don't know, I sense from both of you that there's, like, even more of a leaning in or an openness or an intimacy that you both have inside of you, and I'm just curious about that.
Well, she just hit my core wound. Of course. That has been my...
Do you want to repeat the question?
Oh, yeah.
Ish?
You know, guys like you and I, we are very vulnerable. We can be very open. We can sometimes, you know, Peyton gets a little frustrated. Maybe I overshare a little bit on the podcast, but I can't help it sometimes because it's cathartic, and I want to share in the hopes, like you writing the book, like that it just like unlocks something for somebody, or they don't feel as fucked up as maybe they feel. Because like, I'm kind of fucked up too, you know, like we're all in this together. And, you know, so why is it so hard for us who can be very vulnerable to ask for help? Even with our closest male friends who are on the path, on the journey, awakened, whatever, right? I mean, this came up in my Aya experience, and there's this like, as a child, you know, both my parents worked, and, you know, without going into my whole kind of origin story, there was a lot of self-reliance for me. And there was a lot of, like, I just kind of needed to do some shit myself. And I got pretty good at that. And I just started to be able to kind of do whatever I wanted as far as achievement, you know. Went to Amherst College, which was one of the best schools in the country, got a great job, did really well, had just a success. And I was like, okay, this is just me being self-reliant. And I'd say it's the biggest challenge I have with my wife is when I'm struggling, and there's kind of many ways it can manifest, but I have a really hard time sharing that. Because there's some shame that I can't do this myself. Even though I know in the few instances when I've shared something that is truly vulnerable, she has received it and nurtured and it's like she's done all the things that are antithetical to what my fears are. It's so grooved in my psyche or being that, I dealt with it this summer, that there was stuff that I just couldn't share. And it was a really challenging summer because I was just carrying all the weight of this stuff. And then I'm ruminating on the thing, and the thing is becoming a much bigger issue than it really is. The story around it. And I even, started to share a little bit with some of my close friends recently on the Marco Polo app, right? Where we kind of share video messages, and I was only able to share it because I had come out of it. And I feel as good as I felt in a long time. And I was like, look, I didn't share any of this with you guys because we weren't together in person. I'm not going to share it over text. I'm not going to call you. Like, if there was an opportunity where I could share it with you in person and I felt vulnerable enough to do it, I would have done it. But right now, those things, I'm still having a really hard time. Yeah. So thank you for seeing that. Yeah.
I would like to point out the difference between hearing gunshots when you live in LA and hearing them when you're in Texas out in the country. I hear gunshots out here. I'm like, fuck yeah, where are we at? In LA, you're like, duck. Every time I hear gunfire out here, I'm like, yes, I'm home. Anyway.
Keep practicing.
Yeah. It's funny. I was going to ask Evan today. I was like, you shoot out here, bro? Like, I wish I could do that in my neighborhood. That's a great question, honey. And that's something I really, really do struggle with. And you just unlocked a massive code for me. I literally never thought about the fact that I essentially raised myself, right? My parents were in a different space at that time. I mean, now there's a much more intimate relationship with both of them, and we're all golden. But when I was a kid, I mean, I spent a lot of time by myself, and also because of the, emotional turmoil that I was experiencing. I mean, there was so much shame around it that I didn't feel safe to tell my parents or anyone else about it. So like secrecy and hiding and lying was from 6 years old until 26, when I got sober and started going, oh, wow, you can actually tell the truth about something. I had no idea, about anything. Everything was a lie. But I never thought about that, of the self-reliance piece. That's really interesting. I'm going to actually integrate that. Yeah.
Might need to get an extension on that deadline.
Yeah. The self-reliance piece definitely would be true. I think for me sometimes too, it's like, I don't know. How would I articulate that? Yeah, it's like the sense of not wanting to be a burden on someone. And lacking an awareness of a really fundamental truth. And that is, and I know this, yet I'm still not great at doing it, that when you avail someone the opportunity to be a giver, you're giving to them by the very nature of the fact that you're allowing them to get out of themselves. And I mean, I learned this in addiction recovery, right? It's like you'd be all fucked up and then you go help a newcomer and you're like, oh my God, I feel amazing. All I did was drive this guy back to his, halfway house. I'm on top of the world. What happened? Like I literally just did something for someone. Like it's the helper's high, right? And you're also giving that person who helps you. I'm talking to myself right now, by the way. Remember this, Luke. Yeah. You're giving that person karmic tokens, right? I mean, you ask someone for help and they show up for you and they put in some time and energy to help you. Like you just helped them so much. They just built up their karmic bank.
Well, you're hitting on something for me, which is the other piece of this, is when you're in relationship with someone and they are very good at communicating their needs, right? And you have never really given the time to think about what your needs are. So if you don't even know what your needs are, you certainly can't communicate them. And if you don't have the courage to communicate them anyway, like you're at a deficit. So now they don't know your needs, so they can't come to you. So they just appear needy because they're coming to you with like, I need this and this and this, where they're just communicating like where you can show up and you're not, and it's okay, but here's an opportunity for you. And in not communicating, I am robbing my wife, let's just say part of my wife, of the opportunity to show up for me in that way. And it is that like twisted, like, I'm good. Like, and I know it's not the way to intimacy. It's just such a hard habit to break.
Yeah. What a great question. I feel like Cal and I could have a group therapy session about that.
All the men are going to meet in the back after this.
Yeah. No,
All
it's
the men can get in on that.
it's
We'll have to continue the
Yeah.
thread over dinner.
cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Amazing, guys.